Ranger Jake. Two eagles froze mid-step, his radio crackling to silence as he stared at the impossible scene before him. Coffee spilled from his trembling thermos, steam rising in the cool morning air. It wasn't an attack. It was protection. The massive grizzly bear cradled the unconscious woman against his chest like a mother holds her child, while an 18-foot python coiled around them both. The bear's dark eyes met Jake's with an intelligence that defied every wildlife manual he'd ever read. Behind him, his partner stumbled backward, knocking over equipment cases that clattered across the rocky ground. An elderly woman emerged from the tree line, her weathered face streaked with tears of recognition. "Bear 247, she whispered, her voice breaking 15 years of silence. "My baby boy." The grizzly's massive head turned toward her voice, and he began to hum, a soft, haunting melody that no wild animal should know. "Control, we need immediate backup," Jake radioed, his voice barely steady. "And someone who understands what love looks like when it refuses to let go." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning mist clung to the Yellowstone Valley like a shroud of secrets, and Martha Henderson had been keeping the biggest one of all for 15 years. At 75, her hands still moved with the precision of a trained veterinarian, though the world believed she was nothing more than the widow who ran the remote cabin rentals near the park's western edge. Her silver hair caught the early light as she stood frozen at the forest's edge, watching the impossible reunion unfold before her eyes. Marcus, though the Rangers would never know that name, had grown into 800 pounds of raw power and gentle intelligence. The distinctive white patch on his chest, shaped like a crescent moon, was exactly as she remembered from the day she'd been forced to let him go. Back then, he'd been an 18-month-old cub whose mother had been killed by poachers, left to die in the wilderness until Martha's late husband, Ranger Thomas Henderson, had brought him home wrapped in a Park Service blanket. "We can't keep him, Martha," Thomas had said, even as he watched her bottle feed the orphaned bear. "You know the regulations." But regulations meant nothing to a woman who'd spent 40 years unable to have children of her own. For 15 precious months, Marcus had been her baby boy, sleeping in a makeshift den beside their bed, learning to be gentle with his massive paws, humming along to the lullabies she sang while treating his wounds. The day Wildlife Services discovered him and forced his release had broken something inside her that never quite healed. Now, watching him protect the unconscious woman with the same fierce tenderness she'd taught him, Martha felt her heart shatter and mend simultaneously. The woman trapped in the python's coils was Luna Crow Feather, a wildlife photographer who'd been documenting the mysterious python appearances in the park. What Luna didn't know, what no one knew, was that she was the second child Martha had been forced to give up. 20 years ago, Luna had been a traumatized 2-year-old Lakota girl whose parents died in a car accident. Martha had found her during an emergency veterinary call, malnourished and silent with grief. For 6 months, Martha had cared for her, teaching her to trust again, to laugh, to feel safe. But when Tribal Social Services located Luna's extended family on the Crow Reservation, Martha had made the heartbreaking decision to let her go to preserve her cultural heritage. Now both of her lost children were here in mortal danger, and Martha was the only one who understood the depth of Marcus's devotion. She knew why he wasn't running from the humans surrounding him. She knew why his massive paw rested so gently on Luna's chest, monitoring each precious breath. She knew why he hummed that particular melody, the same lullaby she'd sung to calm his nightmares as a cub. "Rockabye, Marcus, in the treetop," she whispered, stepping forward despite the ranger's warning gestures. "When the wind blows, the cradle will rock." Marcus's enormous head swiveled toward her voice, and for the first time in 15 years, her baby boy was coming home. The python's scales caught the morning sunlight like polished armor as it tightened its grip around Luna Crowfeather's rib cage. She had been photographing the sunrise when the massive Burmese python struck from the underbrush, moving with the deadly precision of an apex predator that had no business being in the Rocky Mountain wilderness. Her Nikon camera hung from its strap around her neck, still recording in video mode, capturing every terrifying second of her struggle for survival. Luna's breath came in short, desperate gasps as the 18-foot serpent constricted around her torso. Each exhale made it impossible to draw the next breath fully, and she could feel her ribs creaking under the immense pressure. The python's head, as large as a dinner plate, hovered near her face with cold, calculating eyes that seemed to measure her diminishing life force. Her emergency beacon had activated automatically when her heart rate spiked, but help was at least 20 minutes away by helicopter. That's when the forest exploded with the sound of splintering branches and a roar that shook the very ground beneath them. Marcus burst through the tree line like a force of nature, his massive frame moving with surprising grace for an 800-pound grizzly bear. But instead of the mindless fury that most bears displayed when confronting threats, there was something almost human in his approach. Calculated, protective, purposeful. He had caught Luna's scent on the morning breeze, a familiar fragrance of lavender and vanilla that triggered memories buried deep in his consciousness. The battle that followed defied everything Ranger Jake Two Eagles thought he knew about wildlife behavior. Marcus didn't simply attack the python with brute force. Instead, he seemed to understand exactly how constrictor snakes operated, using his powerful claws to grip the python's body at strategic points while avoiding its snapping jaws. When the snake attempted to coil around Marcus as well, the bear rolled expertly, forcing the python to choose between maintaining its grip on Luna or defending itself. What stunned Jake most was Marcus's restraint. Even when the python's teeth found purchase in his shoulder, drawing rivulets of blood down his dark fur, Marcus didn't deliver the killing blow that his species was capable of. Instead, he forced the snake to release Luna by applying pressure to specific points along its spine, a technique that seemed almost surgical in its precision. Luna collapsed to the forest floor, gasping and coughing, her ribs screaming in agony but her lungs finally able to draw full breaths. The python, sensing it was outmatched, began to retreat toward the underbrush. Marcus could have easily pursued and killed it, but instead he remained focused entirely on the injured woman before him. The helicopter's rotors grew louder overhead as Marcus gently approached Luna, who was struggling to remain conscious. With movements so careful they seemed choreographed, the massive bear lowered his great head and placed one enormous paw on her chest, just over her heart. His touch was feather-light, and Luna's camera continued recording as Marcus's eyes closed in concentration, as if he were listening to the rhythm of her heartbeat to ensure she was still alive. "Jesus Christ," muttered Jake's partner, Ranger Sarah Mitchell, as their helicopter touched down 50 yards away. "That bear is checking her vitals." The medical team rappelled down with their equipment, but as they approached, Marcus rose to his full height and positioned himself between them and Luna. He didn't growl or show aggression. Instead, he watched their every movement with the protective intensity of a parent guarding an injured child. The paramedics froze, unsure how to proceed when faced with a grizzly who seemed more like a concerned family member than a wild predator. That's when Martha Henderson emerged from the forest. Her weathered hiking boots crunched softly on the pine needles as she approached the tense standoff. The morning light caught the silver in her hair, and her faded denim jacket bore the telltale stains of someone who spent her days caring for injured animals. In her hand, she carried a small leather medical bag that had seen decades of use. "Bear 247, she called softly, her voice carrying across the clearing like a prayer. "Honey, let Mama's friends help her." The effect was instantaneous and miraculous. Marcus's massive frame relaxed, and he stepped back exactly 2 paces, close enough to monitor but far enough to allow access. The paramedics stared in amazement as the bear that had just terrified them into stillness now waited patiently, like a well-trained dog following commands. But it was the sound that came next that made Jake Two Eagles question everything he thought he knew about the natural world. As the medics worked to stabilize Luna's injuries, Marcus began to hum, a soft, melodic tune that sounded hauntingly like a lullaby. The gentle rumble emanated from deep in his chest, and Luna's eyes fluttered open at the familiar sound, though she couldn't understand why it brought her such comfort. Martha's hand flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her weathered cheeks. After 15 years of silence, her baby boy was singing their song. The silence that followed Martha's words hung in the morning air like a held breath. Every eye in the clearing turned from the massive Grizzly to the elderly woman who had just spoken to 800 pounds of wild predator as if he were a beloved pet. Dr. Harrison Blackwood, who had arrived moments earlier with his research team, felt his scientific worldview crumble as he watched the bear respond to Martha's voice with the eager attention of a child recognizing his mother. Luna's breathing was shallow and labored as the paramedics worked to assess her injuries. Her ribs were severely bruised, possibly cracked, and internal bleeding was a serious concern. The nearest trauma center was 2 hours away by helicopter, and every minute counted. But Marcus seemed to understand the urgency better than anyone, his dark eyes never leaving Luna's face as the medical team prepared her for transport. "Ma'am, you need to step back," called paramedic Tony Rodriguez, his voice tight with professional concern and personal amazement. "We don't know how that bear will react to—" "His name is Marcus," Martha interrupted quietly, moving closer despite the warnings. "And he won't hurt anyone. He's protecting her." Dr. Blackwood pushed forward, his recorder already running and his mind racing with the implications of what he was witnessing. At 52, he had spent his career studying animal behavior, but nothing in his extensive education had prepared him for a wild grizzly displaying this level of emotional intelligence and restraint. His reputation had been destroyed 3 years earlier when a colleague had falsified data in a joint research project, and he had been fighting ever since to restore his credibility in the scientific community. "Mrs. he began, extending his hand toward Martha. "Henderson." "Martha Henderson." Her voice carried the weight of someone who had been keeping secrets for far too long. "And before you ask, yes, I know this bear. I raised him from a 3-month-old cub." The admission hit the assembled group like a physical blow. Ranger Jake. Two Eagles felt his stomach drop as the legal implications crashed over him. Harboring wild animals was a federal crime, punishable by up to $50,000 in fines and potential jail time. But as he watched Marcus gently nudge Luna's hand with his massive snout, Jake found himself more concerned with understanding than enforcing. "That's impossible," Dr. Blackwood stammered. "Wild bears don't form attachments like this. They don't respond to human commands or show this level of—" "You're right," Martha said, her weathered hands trembling as she reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a faded photograph. "They don't—" But Marcus isn't entirely wild, and he never has been. The photograph showed a much younger Martha bottle feeding a tiny black bear cub with a distinctive white patch on his chest. The cub's eyes were closed in contentment, his small paws wrapped around the bottle with human-like dexterity. In the background, a man in a park ranger uniform watched with a mixture of joy and concern etched across his face. "My husband Thomas found him next to his dead mother 15 years ago," Martha continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Poachers had killed her for her gallbladder, left her cub to starve. Thomas brought him to me because he knew I couldn't have children of my own and because he trusted me to save a life that nobody else would fight for." Luna stirred on the stretcher, her eyes fluttering open as the morphine began to take effect. Through her haze of pain and medication, she heard the conversation around her, but couldn't quite process the magnitude of what was being revealed. The bear that had saved her life was humming again, the same gentle melody that had comforted her during the attack, and something deep in her memory stirred at the sound. "We kept him for 15 months, Martha continued, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I taught him to be gentle, to understand commands, to trust humans instead of fearing them. But when Wildlife Services discovered him during a routine inspection, they forced me to release him. Said keeping a wild animal was dangerous and illegal, no matter how well socialized he was." Dr. Blackwood's mind reeled with the scientific implications. "But that would mean he's been living wild for over 13 years while retaining learned behaviors. That's unprecedented. Most animals revert to instinct within months of release." "Not Marcus," Martha said softly, watching as the bear continued his vigil beside Luna's stretcher. "Love doesn't forget, Dr. Blackwood, even when it's forced to let go." The helicopter pilot's voice crackled over the radio, urgent and insistent. "We need to transport now. Patient's vitals are dropping, and we're approaching the golden hour for internal injuries." Marcus seemed to understand the urgency in the pilot's voice. As the medical team prepared to load Luna into the helicopter, the massive bear stepped back but refused to retreat beyond visual range. His distress was palpable, manifesting in low, mournful sounds that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "He thinks we're taking her away forever," Martha whispered, recognizing the same heartbroken sounds Marcus had made the day she was forced to release him. "He thinks he's losing someone he loves all over again." Luna's hand moved weakly toward the sound of Marcus's distress, and in a moment that would haunt everyone present for years to come, the injured woman managed to whisper, "It's okay, big guy. I'll come back." Marcus fell silent, his massive head tilting as if he understood not just her words, but the promise behind them. As the helicopter lifted off with Luna inside, the bear remained motionless in the clearing, watching until the aircraft disappeared beyond the tree line. Dr. Blackwood lowered his recorder, realizing he had just witnessed something that would challenge everything the scientific community believed about animal consciousness and emotional capacity. But more than that, he had seen proof that love, true, unconditional love, could transcend species, survive separation, and endure against impossible odds. "Mrs. Henderson," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk." The hospital parking lot had become an unlikely vigil site. For 3 days, Marcus had maintained his watch from the edge of the asphalt, close enough to sense Luna's presence inside the building but respecting the invisible boundary that separated the wild from civilization. He had constructed a makeshift bed beneath an ancient pine tree, its branches providing shelter from the intermittent spring rain that swept across the valley. Hospital staff and visitors had grown accustomed to the sight of the massive Grizzly, though security guards kept a respectful distance after witnessing his gentle demeanor. Martha had barely left his side, bringing blankets and thermos bottles of coffee that she shared with the growing number of curious onlookers who came to witness the unprecedented display of animal devotion. Eleanor Whitman, her closest friend and fellow animal lover, had driven up from Bozeman the moment she heard Martha's voice crack over the phone. At 68, Eleanor had spent 4 decades studying animal behavior, but she had never documented anything approaching the complexity of Marcus's emotional response. "He's grieving," Eleanor observed, watching as Marcus lifted his massive head each time an ambulance arrived, hope flickering in his dark eyes before disappointment settled back over his features. "Look at his body language, the way he positions himself to watch the entrance, how he responds to medical sounds. He understands she's hurt, and he's waiting for her to come back to him." Dr. Blackwood had established a research station in the parking lot. documenting Marcus's behavior with the dedication of a man seeking redemption. His previous research on large mammal intelligence had been discredited when his partner had falsified data, leaving Blackwood's reputation in ruins. But what he was witnessing with Marcus offered a chance to restore his credibility while contributing genuinely groundbreaking observations to the scientific community. Day 3, 2:15 p.m., he spoke into his digital recorder. Subject continues to maintain protective posture facing hospital entrance. Noteworthy, subject has refused all food offerings from onlookers, suggesting emotional distress is overriding basic survival instincts. This level of sustained emotional response in a wild grizzly is unprecedented in scientific literature. The legal implications of Martha's revelation had created a bureaucratic nightmare that threatened to overshadow the remarkable story unfolding before them. Federal wildlife officials had arrived on the second day, led by Agent Patricia Clearwater, a stern woman in her 40s whose job was to enforce the laws protecting both wildlife and human safety. The fines Martha faced could reach $50,000, and there was serious discussion about relocating Marcus to a wildlife sanctuary or zoo. "Mrs. Henderson, I understand the emotional attachment," Agent Clearwater said, her voice not unkind but firm with regulatory authority. "But the fact remains that you violated federal law by harboring a wild animal. And now that animal has formed an inappropriate bond with human society. He could be dangerous." Martha's response carried the quiet strength of a woman who had spent her life fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. "Agent Clearwater, with all due respect, that bear has had 3 days to hurt someone if he was inclined to violence. Instead, he's shown more compassion and restraint than most humans I know. Marcus isn't dangerous, he's heartbroken." The media attention had grown exponentially as word of the story spread. Local news crews gave way to national networks, and social media exploded with hashtags like #MarcusTheHero and #BearLove. The hospital had to implement crowd control measures as tourists and animal lovers made pilgrimages to witness the vigil. But through it all, Marcus remained focused solely on the building where Luna fought to recover. Inside the hospital, Luna's condition had stabilized but remained serious. 3 ribs were fractured, and the internal bleeding had required emergency surgery. Dr. Sarah Kim, the trauma surgeon, had been monitoring her patient's unusual request to be moved to a room facing the parking lot. "She keeps asking about the bear," Dr. Kim reported to Martha during one of her twice-daily visits. "Her vital signs actually improve when we tell her he's still outside. I've never seen anything like it. It's as if knowing he's there is part of her healing process." What Luna didn't know, and what Martha struggled with revealing, was the deeper connection that tied them together. 20 years earlier, Luna had been a traumatized 2-year-old Lakota child whose parents had died in a car accident on the reservation. Martha had been volunteering at the tribal health clinic when Luna was brought in, malnourished and silent with grief. For 6 months, Martha had cared for her, slowly coaxing smiles and laughter from the withdrawn little girl. But when Luna's grandmother on the Crow Reservation was located and deemed capable of providing care, Martha had made the heartbreaking decision to let Luna go. Preserving the child's connection to her native heritage was more important than Martha's desire to keep her, even though letting go had felt like losing a daughter. "She called for Mama during the python attack," Martha confided to Eleanor as they sat beside Marcus in the parking lot. "It's on her camera footage. After 20 years, she still remembers." Eleanor reached over and squeezed her friend's hand. "Some bonds don't break, honey. They just stretch across time and distance until love finds a way to bring them back together." The mystery of the python attacks had been weighing heavily on Dr. Blackwood's mind. Burmese pythons weren't native to Montana, and their presence in Yellowstone defied natural migration patterns. His investigation had uncovered disturbing evidence that someone was deliberately introducing the invasive species to the park ecosystem. A second attack on an elderly hiker 2 days after Luna's incident had yielded a crucial clue. The python had a surgical implant containing a tracking device. "Someone is monitoring these snakes," Blackwood explained to a gathering of park officials and law enforcement. "This isn't accidental migration or escaped pets. These pythons are being strategically placed, and whoever is doing it has sophisticated tracking technology." The implications were staggering. If someone was using deadly snakes as weapons or research subjects in a national park, it represented a threat to both wildlife and human visitors. The FBI had been called in to investigate, and the Park Service was considering temporary closures of remote hiking areas. Marcus seemed to sense the growing tension among the humans around him. On the third evening, as Martha sat beside him, sharing a quiet dinner of sandwiches and coffee, the massive bear did something that left her speechless. Slowly, carefully, he reached into the underbrush beside his makeshift bed and withdrew a small bouquet of wildflowers, mountain lupines and Indian paintbrush, clutched gently in his enormous claws. "Oh, Marcus," Martha whispered, remembering how he used to bring her flowers as a cub, proud offerings of dandelions and clover that he would place carefully on her pillow. "You still remember." The bear approached the hospital building as close as security would allow and placed the flowers on the ground facing Luna's window. Then he returned to his vigil, settling back into position with the patient determination of someone who had no intention of giving up. Word of Marcus's daily flower offering spread quickly through social media, and by the fourth day the hospital was receiving hundreds of floral arrangements from people around the world who had been touched by the story. The lobby looked like a botanical garden, with cards expressing hope for Luna's recovery and admiration for Marcus's devotion, but the legal pressure was mounting. Agent Clearwater had received orders from Washington to resolve the situation quickly, before the media attention created a precedent that could complicate wildlife enforcement nationwide. The options were limited and none of them good. Marcus could be tranquilized and relocated to a facility far from Yellowstone, or in the worst-case scenario, euthanized if he was deemed too habituated to humans to survive in the wild. "We can't let them take him," Martha said to Eleanor as they watched Marcus carefully arrange fresh flowers by the hospital building. "Not again. I won't survive losing him twice." Eleanor had been making phone calls all day, reaching out to contacts in the wildlife advocacy community and legal profession. "There might be another option," she said carefully. "I've been talking to some lawyers who specialize in animal rights cases. They think we might be able to argue for a special exception based on Marcus's unique circumstances and demonstrated value to wildlife research." The suggestion offered a glimmer of hope, but Martha knew that legal battles took time, and Agent Clearwater was under pressure to act quickly. As the sun set on their fourth day in the parking lot, Martha made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to tell Luna the truth," she announced, standing up and brushing pine needles from her jeans. "About Marcus, about me, about all of it. She deserves to know why that bear saved her life, and why he won't leave until he knows she's safe." Eleanor nodded slowly, understanding the weight of Martha's decision. "And if she rejects you, if learning the truth makes her angry about the secrets you've kept?" Martha looked at Marcus, who was watching the hospital building with unwavering attention, and then at the flowers he had placed there with such tender care. "Then at least she'll understand that love doesn't require understanding to be real, and maybe that will be enough." The confrontation that would determine Marcus's fate began at dawn on the fifth day, when a convoy of federal vehicles rolled into the hospital parking lot with the grim efficiency of a military operation. Agent Patricia Clearwater emerged from the lead SUV, flanked by wildlife specialists, veterinarians, and a tranquilizer team equipped with enough firepower to bring down a charging elephant. The sight of the approaching officials caused Marcus to rise to his full height, not in aggression, but in the protective stance of a guardian sensing threat. Dr. Blackwood intercepted the federal team before they could establish a perimeter around Marcus, his recorder still running and his determination fueled by the knowledge that he was witnessing something that could revolutionize animal behavioral science. "Agent Clearwater, I must strongly advise against any precipitous action. This bear has shown no signs of aggression toward humans and has demonstrated unprecedented cognitive abilities that warrant further study." "Dr. Blackwood, this isn't a research project," Agent Clearwater replied curtly, her eyes never leaving Marcus as her team began unpacking tranquilizer equipment. "This is a public safety issue. A habituated grizzly bear in a hospital parking lot represents an unacceptable risk to civilian safety. The animal needs to be relocated immediately." Martha had been watching the federal arrival from Luna's hospital room window, and she felt her heart shatter as she saw the tranquilizer guns being assembled. Luna, who had been awake for 2 days but still weak from her injuries, gripped Martha's hand with surprising strength as she witnessed the scene unfolding below. "They're going to take him away," Luna whispered, tears streaming down her bruised face. "After everything he did to save me, they're going to punish him for it." "Not if I can help it," Martha said with the fierce determination of a mother protecting her child. She had spent the previous evening sharing the truth with Luna about Marcus's rescue as a cub, about their forced separation 15 years ago, and about Luna's own connection to Martha's past. The revelations had initially shocked Luna into silence, but as the hours passed, understanding had replaced confusion and gratitude had replaced anger. The media circus that had grown around Marcus's vigil now became a battleground of public opinion. News crews captured every moment as Martha descended from the hospital to place herself between the federal agents and the bear who had become a symbol of love transcending species. Social media exploded with #SaveMarcus hashtags as millions of people around the world watched the standoff unfold in real time. "Mrs. Henderson, step away from the animal," Agent Clearwater commanded, her hand resting on her service weapon as a precautionary measure. "Your emotional attachment to this bear doesn't change the fact that he poses a risk to public safety." Martha stood her ground, her 75-year-old frame seeming to grow taller as she faced down the federal authority. "Agent Clearwater, in 40 years of veterinary practice, I've treated thousands of animals. I've been bitten, clawed, kicked, and trampled by creatures that were genuinely dangerous. But this bear, my bear, has never shown a moment of aggression toward any human being. The only threat Marcus poses is to your bureaucratic need for simple solutions to complex problems." Eleanor Whitman had spent the night making frantic phone calls to every contact in her decades-long network of animal advocates, and her efforts were beginning to bear fruit. A convoy of vehicles bearing the logos of wildlife protection organizations began arriving at the hospital, followed by legal representatives who had driven through the night from environmental law firms across the region. "Agent Clearwater," announced attorney Rebecca Stormcrow, a prominent Native American advocate for animal rights, "I'm here to inform you that my clients have filed an emergency injunction against any federal action involving the grizzly bear known as Marcus. The injunction is based on his unique status as a research subject of extraordinary scientific value and his demonstrated lack of threat to human safety." The legal maneuvering created a temporary stalemate, but everyone present understood that it was only a matter of time before federal authority would override local intervention. Marcus seemed to sense the tension surrounding him, and he began displaying stress behaviors that Dr. Blackwood documented with growing concern. The bear paced restlessly, occasionally emitting low moans that carried across the parking lot like a funeral dirge. It was then that the second crisis struck with devastating suddenness. "Doctor, Sarah Kim burst through the hospital's emergency entrance, her surgical scrubs stained with blood and her face pale with urgency. "We need help out here. Another python attack, multiple victims. The ambulances are 3 minutes out." The python that had attacked a family of hikers near the park's eastern entrance was even larger than the one that had nearly killed Luna. At 22 feet in length, it had struck without warning, coiling around 8-year-old Tommy Clearwater, Agent Clearwater's nephew, who had been visiting the park with his parents. The boy's father had been severely bitten trying to free his son, and the mother was in shock, unable to provide coherent information about the attack's location. Marcus responded to the chaos with immediate understanding, his stress behaviors vanishing as his protective instincts took control. Without hesitation, the massive bear abandoned his vigil position and began moving toward the emergency vehicles with purposeful determination. Agent Clearwater found herself in the impossible position of watching Marcus approach the ambulance carrying her injured nephew, torn between protocol and the growing realization that the bear might be their best hope for understanding the python threat. "He knows," Dr. Blackwood said urgently, his recorder capturing every moment of Marcus's response. "Look at his body language. He recognizes the scent of python venom, the sound of python-related injuries. He's trying to help." The ambulance doors opened to reveal Tommy Clearwater unconscious and barely breathing, python bite marks visible on his small arm, and signs of constriction injuries around his torso. Marcus approached the vehicle with infinite care, his massive head extending toward the boy as he drew in deep breaths, analyzing scents that human noses couldn't detect. Suddenly, Marcus's entire demeanor changed. He began emitting a series of urgent vocalizations, not the aggressive roars of a threatening bear, but the complex communication sounds that Martha remembered from his youth. He was trying to tell them something, using the only language he had to convey critical information about the python attacks. "He's tracking," Martha realized, her veterinary training helping her interpret Marcus's behavior. "He can smell where the python has been, maybe even where it's going. Agent Clearwater, if you want to save your nephew and stop these attacks, you need to let Marcus show us what he knows." The federal agent stared at her unconscious nephew, then at the bear who was clearly agitated about something only he could sense. Every regulation, every protocol, every bit of training told her to proceed with Marcus's capture and relocation. But the maternal desperation in her eyes overrode her professional obligations. "What are you suggesting?" Agent Clearwater asked, her voice cracking with emotion. "Let Marcus track the python," Martha said urgently. "He saved Luna from one of these snakes, and he clearly understands the threat they represent. If there are more pythons out there, if someone is deliberately placing them, Marcus might be our only way to find them before more people get hurt." Dr. Blackwood stepped forward, his scientific excitement barely contained. "Agent Clearwater, what Mrs. Henderson is proposing has precedent. Working dogs are used routinely in law enforcement and search and rescue operations. Marcus has demonstrated intelligence and training that exceeds most domestic animals, and his natural advantages as a grizzly bear could make him uniquely effective against python threats." The decision Agent Clearwater faced would haunt her for the rest of her career. Every regulation demanded that she proceed with Marcus's capture, but the evidence of his unique abilities and the desperate need to understand the python conspiracy created an impossible dilemma. As she looked at her nephew's pale face and heard Marcus's urgent vocalizations, she made a choice that defied every protocol in her training manual. "Mrs. Henderson," she said quietly, "if that bear can help us find whoever is responsible for these attacks, then I'm willing to discuss alternatives to immediate relocation." Martha felt tears of relief streaming down her face as she approached Marcus, who was still focused intently on the scents emanating from the ambulance. "Okay, baby boy," she whispered, using the voice that had comforted him through countless childhood fears. "Show us what you know." Marcus looked directly into Martha's eyes, and in that moment, every person present understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Not just the intelligence of a remarkable animal, but the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, tested by separation and strengthened by love that refused to die. The expedition into Yellowstone's backcountry to track the python source began at first light, with Marcus leading a convoy that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Agent Clearwater had assembled a team that included park rangers, FBI investigators, Dr. Blackwood with his research equipment, and Martha, who insisted on accompanying them despite the obvious dangers. Luna, against all medical advice, had checked herself out of the hospital with her ribs still healing, determined not to miss what might be her only chance to understand the creature that had nearly killed her. Marcus moved through the wilderness with the confidence of someone returning to familiar territory, his massive form navigating the dense forest paths with surprising grace. Every few hundred yards he would stop to test the air, his sensitive nose detecting traces of python scent that had been carried on the mountain winds. "Doctor?" Blackwood documented every behavior, amazed by the bear's methodical approach to tracking. "He's not just following a scent trail," Blackwood observed, speaking quietly into his recorder. "He's analyzing air currents, temperature changes, and environmental factors to predict where the pythons might be heading. This level of deductive reasoning in a wild animal is unprecedented." The deeper they ventured into the park's remote sections, the more evidence they found of ecological disruption. Native prey animals were scarce in areas where pythons had been active, and the natural balance that had existed for centuries was showing signs of strain. Martha felt a growing dread as she realized the scope of what they were confronting, not just individual snake attacks, but a systematic assault on Yellowstone's ecosystem. After 6 hours of tracking, Marcus led them to a hidden valley that didn't appear on any official park maps. The entrance was concealed by dense undergrowth and fallen logs, accessible only through a narrow path that seemed almost deliberately camouflaged. At the valley's center stood a collection of temporary structures, research tents, equipment sheds, and holding facilities that bore the logo of Stonecrow Biological Research. "Dr. Richard Stonecrow," Agent Clearwater said grimly, recognizing the name from her briefing files. "He lost his federal research permits 3 years ago for conducting unauthorized experiments on protected species. We've been trying to locate him ever since." The makeshift laboratory they discovered was a nightmare of scientific ambition, unchecked by ethical constraints. Dozens of terrariums contained pythons of various sizes, each tagged with identification numbers and monitoring equipment. Charts on the walls tracked feeding schedules, growth rates, and what appeared to be planned release dates throughout the park. Most disturbing were the video monitors showing feeds from cameras placed throughout Yellowstone, allowing Stonecrow to observe the python's impact on the ecosystem in real time. Marcus's behavior changed dramatically as they explored the facility. The bear, who had been so gentle with Luna and respectful of humans, now displayed signs of genuine aggression, his hackles raised and low growls rumbling from his chest. Martha realized that Marcus could smell the fear and suffering of the creatures that had been held here, and his protective instincts were responding to the evidence of cruelty. "Look at this," Luna called out, her photographer's eye catching details that others might miss. She was examining a wall covered with photographs and research notes documenting python attacks on park wildlife. "He's been studying predation patterns, trying to determine the most effective locations for releases to maximize ecological damage." "Doctor." Blackwood felt sick as he reviewed Stonecrow's research logs. "This isn't scientific study, it's biological warfare against a protected ecosystem. He's been introducing invasive predators specifically to disrupt the natural balance and create a crisis that would generate research funding and media attention. The sound of approaching vehicles sent the team scrambling for cover, but Marcus positioned himself at the valley entrance with the clear intention of confronting whoever was returning to the facility. Through the trees, they could see Dr. Stonecrow's distinctive red pickup truck, followed by a trailer that undoubtedly contained more pythons for release. "We need to call for backup," Agent Clearwater whispered urgently into her radio, but the remote location put them beyond communication range. They were on their own, facing a man who had already demonstrated his willingness to use deadly predators as weapons against innocent people, Doctor. Richard Stonecrow emerged from his vehicle with the arrogant confidence of someone who believed his intellectual superiority justified any action. At 61, he carried himself with the bearing of academic entitlement, his expensive outdoor gear contrasting sharply with the shabby conditions of his illegal research facility. Behind him, two associates began unloading equipment with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this many times before. "Dr. Stonecrow," Agent Clearwater called out, stepping into view with her weapon drawn. "Federal agents, you're under arrest for violations of the Endangered Species Act and endangering public safety." Stonecrow's reaction was immediate and calculating. Instead of surrendering, he moved toward the trailer containing the pythons, his hand reaching for what appeared to be release mechanisms. "I wouldn't recommend getting any closer," he called back. "These containers hold 12 adult Burmese pythons, each over 15 feet long. One wrong move and this valley becomes a death trap for all of us." The standoff that followed tested everyone's courage and resolve. Stonecrow held his position near the python containers while his associates flanked the area, clearly prepared for confrontation. Agent Clearwater and her team were outnumbered and outgunned, with innocent civilians like Martha and Luna caught in the middle of a dangerous situation that was rapidly escalating beyond anyone's control. It was Marcus who broke the stalemate with decisive action that no one could have predicted. Moving with the stealth that only an apex predator could achieve, the massive bear circled around behind Stonecrow's position, using the terrain and vegetation to mask his approach. When he finally revealed himself, it was with the full, terrifying presence of 800 pounds of protective fury, positioned directly between the criminals and the people he had chosen to defend. "Jesus Christ," one of Stonecrow's associates whispered, his weapon shaking in his hands as he stared at the largest grizzly bear he had ever seen. "Nobody said anything about dealing with bears." Marcus rose to his full height, his massive frame silhouetted against the morning sky like a force of nature made manifest. But instead of attacking, he did something that left everyone speechless. Looking directly at Dr. Stonecrow, Marcus began to speak, not with words but with a series of vocalizations so complex and intentional that they carried the unmistakable quality of communication. Martha felt tears streaming down her face as she recognized the sounds Marcus was making. They were the same protective calls he had used as a young bear when warning threats away from his territory, but refined and sophisticated by years of observation and intelligence. He was giving Stonecrow one chance to surrender peacefully before the consequences became irreversible. "He's negotiating," Dr. Blackwood whispered in amazement. "That bear is actually trying to resolve this conflict without violence." But as the tense moments stretched into an eternity of held breath and racing hearts, it became clear that Dr. Richard Stonecrow had no intention of surrendering to anyone, human or animal. The tragedy that unfolded in the hidden valley would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. Dr. Richard Stonecrow's response to Marcus's peaceful overture was to release the largest python from its container, a 24-foot monster that had been specifically bred for maximum size and aggression. As the massive serpent emerged into the morning light, its scales glistening with a malevolent beauty, Stone Crow's voice carried across the valley with the cold satisfaction of a man who believed he was proving a point about the supremacy of intellect over instinct. "This is what happens when bleeding hearts try to interfere with real science," Stone Crow called out, backing away as the python began to assess its surroundings. "That bear may have gotten lucky with one snake, but 12 adult pythons will teach you all about the natural order." Marcus's reaction to the emerging python was immediate and decisive, but as he moved to intercept the threat, Stone Crow's associates began releasing additional snakes from their containers. Within moments, the valley floor became a writhing nightmare of scales and muscle as multiple pythons spread out in different directions. The team found themselves surrounded by predators that had been trained to view humans as prey, and Marcus couldn't be everywhere at once. Agent Clearwater fired her weapon at the nearest python, but the thick scales deflected the bullets with minimal effect. "These things are armored," she shouted, grabbing Martha and Luna to pull them toward higher ground. "We need to get out of here before they coordinate an attack." But Martha broke free from Clearwater's protective grip, her veterinary instincts overriding her survival fears as she watched Marcus struggle against multiple pythons simultaneously. The largest snake had coiled around his hindquarters while two smaller ones attempted to reach his throat, and she could see that even his massive strength was being overwhelmed by the coordinated assault. "Martha, no!" Luna screamed as the elderly woman ran toward the melee, but Martha had made her choice. She couldn't watch her beloved Marcus die the same way she had been forced to watch him disappear 15 years earlier. This time she would fight for him with everything she had. Dr. Blackwood's recorder captured every horrifying moment as Martha threw herself into the battle, using her knowledge of snake anatomy to target vulnerable points while Marcus continued his desperate struggle. Her small veterinary knife found critical nerve clusters that forced two pythons to release their grip, but the effort left her exposed to the largest snake, which had been waiting for exactly such an opportunity. The 24-foot python struck with lightning speed, its massive coils enveloping Martha's frail body with crushing force. Her scream of pain and terror cut through the chaos like a blade, and Marcus's response was immediate and devastating. With a roar that shook the ground beneath their feet, the bear abandoned his defensive strategy and launched himself at the python, holding Martha with a fury that transcended mere animal aggression. What followed was a battle that seemed to tear at the very fabric of nature itself. Marcus's claws and teeth found purchase in the python's thick hide, but the snake's constricting power was slowly crushing the life out of Martha even as he fought to free her. Blood flowed from wounds on both combatants, staining the valley floor crimson as the struggle reached a crescendo of violence and desperation. "She's dying," Dr. Blackwood said in horror, his scientific detachment crumbling as he watched Martha's face turn blue from oxygen deprivation. "The snake is killing her, while Marcus is trying to save her." Agent Clearwater had been coordinating the evacuation of her team, but she stopped when she heard Martha's weakening voice calling out across the battlefield. Despite the python's crushing grip, the elderly woman was trying to sing, the same lullaby she had used to comfort Marcus as a frightened cub, now offered as a gift of love in what might be her final moments. "Rock-a-bye, Marcus, in the treetop," Martha gasped, her voice barely audible but carrying a lifetime of maternal devotion. "When the wind blows, the cradle will rock." The effect on Marcus was instantaneous and heartbreaking. The massive bear's fury transformed into something even more powerful, a desperate, protective love that gave him strength beyond his physical limitations. With a final titanic effort, he managed to break the python's spine while simultaneously crushing its skull. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Martha had stopped breathing, Marcus cradled her limp body with infinite gentleness, his massive paws trembling as he tried to understand why she wasn't responding to his touch. He nudged her face with his snout, emitting the soft whimpering sounds of a lost child calling for his mother. When she didn't stir, his anguish filled the valley with a sound that no human present would ever forget. The cry of a son who had lost everything that mattered to him. Dr. Blackwood approached slowly, his hands shaking as he checked Martha's pulse and found nothing. "She's gone," he whispered, the words seeming to echo with finality in the sudden silence that had fallen over the valley. The constriction stopped her heart. Luna collapsed to her knees beside Martha's body, her own injuries forgotten in the face of overwhelming grief. The woman who had saved her life, twice, was dead, and the bear who had protected them both was now alone in a world that would never understand the depth of his loss. She reached out to touch Marcus's massive head, offering what comfort she could to a creature whose capacity for love had just been shattered beyond repair. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to Marcus, her tears falling onto his dark fur. "She loved you so much. You were everything to her." The aftermath of the battle was swift and brutal in its efficiency. Dr. Stonecrow and his associates were arrested without further resistance, their weapons useless against Agent Clearwater's growing fury at the senseless loss of life their greed had caused. The surviving pythons were contained and would be relocated to appropriate facilities, though the damage to Yellowstone's ecosystem would take years to assess and repair. But none of the practical concerns mattered to Marcus, who remained beside Martha's body as the sun reached its zenith and began its descent toward evening. He refused to eat, refused to drink, and refused to acknowledge the humans who tried to approach with condolences and assistance. The bear, who had shown such remarkable intelligence and emotional sophistication, had retreated into a grief so profound that it seemed to shut out the entire world. Dr. Blackwood's final recordings from that day captured the heartbreaking image of Marcus gently placing wildflowers around Martha's body. The same mountain lupines and Indian paintbrush he had brought to Luna's hospital window, now offered as a funeral tribute to the woman who had been his mother in every way that mattered. The scientific implications of such behavior were staggering, but they seemed insignificant compared to the raw emotion of a creature mourning the loss of unconditional love. As the evacuation teams prepared to transport Martha's body and the captured criminals, Agent Clearwater faced an impossible decision about Marcus's future. The bear's heroic actions had saved multiple lives and exposed a dangerous criminal conspiracy, but his emotional state raised serious questions about his ability to survive in the wild. More than that, removing him from the place where Martha had died seemed like an additional cruelty that no bureaucratic regulation could justify. "What happens to him now?" Luna asked, her voice hollow with exhaustion and grief, as she watched Marcus continue his vigil beside Martha's still form. Agent Clearwater looked at the bear who had defied every assumption about wildlife behavior and wondered if there were any precedents for a situation like this. "I honestly don't know," she admitted. "But I think Martha would want us to find an answer that honors what she died trying to protect." As the sun set over the valley where so much had been lost and revealed, Marcus remained beside the woman who had given him life twice, once as a helpless cub and again as a creature capable of love that transcended species and defied every law of nature that humans thought they understood. The greatest tragedy wasn't just that Martha was gone, but that Marcus now faced a world where no one might ever understand the depth of what he had lost. The revelation that would change everything came 3 days after Martha's funeral, when Luna was helping Eleanor sort through Martha's personal belongings at the cabin. Hidden in an old cedar chest beneath layers of quilts and family photographs, they discovered a leather-bound journal that Martha had kept meticulously for over 20 years. The entries revealed a truth so profound that it recontextualized everything they thought they understood about the bonds that had brought them all together. December 15, 2003. Luna read aloud, her voice trembling as she deciphered Martha's careful handwriting. Little Luna said her first complete sentence today. "Mama, sing to Marcus. She doesn't understand that I can't be her mama forever, but watching her comfort that frightened bear cub with the same lullaby I taught her breaks my heart. They're both orphans finding family in each other, and I'm the temporary guardian who will have to let them both go." Eleanor sank into Martha's favorite armchair, the implications of the journal entries washing over her like a revelation. "She knew," Eleanor whispered. "All these years, Martha knew that you and Marcus would find each other again. That's why she never moved away from Yellowstone, why she kept that cabin even when money was tight. She was waiting for her children to come home." The journal chronicled 20 years of silent vigil, documenting every reported bear sighting that might have been Marcus, every news story about Native American photographers that might have mentioned Luna. Martha had tracked their separate lives with the dedication of a mother who never stopped believing that love would eventually reunite her family, even if she couldn't be there to see it happen. April 3, 2018. Luna continued reading, tears streaming down her face. "Saw Luna's photograph in National Geographic today. Rising stars of wildlife photography. She's become everything I hoped she would be, strong and independent and connected to her heritage. She's working in Yellowstone now, so close I could reach out and touch her, but I won't. She has her own life, her own family. But maybe, just maybe, the universe will find a way to let me see her again." The final entries in the journal revealed Martha's growing awareness of the python problem and her desperate hope that the crisis might somehow bring her lost children back into her orbit. She had been documenting unusual wildlife behavior for months, including reports of an exceptionally large grizzly bear that showed unusual interest in human activities near the park's western boundary. "She knew it was Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice filled with wonder and heartbreak. Listen to this entry from last month. The rangers are calling him Bear 247 again, but they don't understand that he never forgot his real name. He's been protecting hikers, leading lost children back to safety, acting more like a guardian than a predator. My boy remembers what I taught him about love being stronger than fear." Luna clutched the journal to her chest, overwhelmed by the depth of Martha's sacrifice and the love that had guided her decisions for 2 decades. "She gave us both up so we could become who we were meant to be, but she never stopped hoping we'd find our way back to each other." The sound of heavy footsteps on the cabin's front porch interrupted their emotional discovery. Through the window, they could see Marcus approaching with the slow, deliberate gait of a creature carrying profound grief. He had been visiting the cabin daily since Martha's funeral, leaving wildflowers by the door and sitting in silent vigil on the porch where he had spent so many evenings as a cub. "He knows we're here," Luna said softly, watching as Marcus carefully placed a bouquet of mountain lupines on the doorstep before settling into his familiar position facing the cabin. "He's been coming here every day, waiting for her to come home." Eleanor opened the front door slowly, speaking in the gentle tones that Martha had taught her to use around grieving animals. "Hello, Marcus. We're just looking through Martha's things, trying to understand how much she loved you both." Marcus raised his massive head at the sound of Eleanor's voice, his dark eyes reflecting a depth of sorrow that seemed almost human in its intensity. He didn't approach the cabin, but his posture suggested that he was listening, trying to comprehend the conversation taking place inside the home where he had once felt safe and loved. Luna made a decision that would have terrified her a week earlier, but now felt as natural as breathing. She walked slowly onto the porch, carrying Martha's journal, and sat down just a few feet from where Marcus maintained his vigil. The massive bear watched her carefully, but didn't retreat, perhaps recognizing something familiar in her scent or manner. "She wrote about us," Luna said softly, opening the journal to show Marcus the pages covered with Martha's handwriting. "For 20 years, she wrote about how much she missed us, how much she hoped we were happy, how much she wanted us to find each other again." Marcus's reaction to the sight of Martha's journal was immediate and heartbreaking. He approached Luna with infinite care, his massive snout extending toward the familiar scent of the woman who had raised him. When his nose touched the pages, he emitted a low, mournful sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "Look at this," Luna said, turning to a page that contained not just writing but small pressed flowers, the same wild flowers that Marcus had been bringing to Martha for 15 years. "She saved every flower you ever gave her, every single one." The discovery of Martha's preserved flower collection prompted a behavior in Marcus that left both women speechless. The massive bear began to vocalize in a pattern that seemed almost like speech, complex sounds that rose and fell with the rhythm of human conversation. Luna recognized the cadence immediately. It was the same lullaby that Martha had hummed to comfort her during the python attack, now being offered back as Marcus's attempt to honor his mother's memory. "He's singing to her," Eleanor whispered, her scientific mind struggling to process the implications of what she was witnessing. "He's actually singing the lullaby she taught him, trying to comfort her spirit the same way she comforted him." Dr. Blackwood arrived at the cabin as Marcus's song reached its crescendo, drawn by Eleanor's urgent phone call about the journal's revelations. He found the three of them, woman, bear, and elderly witness, united in a moment of grief that transcended every boundary between species and challenged every assumption about the nature of consciousness and love. "This changes everything we thought we knew about animal cognition," Blackwood said quietly, his recorder capturing every nuance of Marcus's vocal performance. "He's not just remembering a learned behavior, he's creating new meaning from remembered love, adapting his mother's comfort to comfort her memory." The sun was setting over the Yellowstone Valley when Luna made the decision that would define the rest of her life. Standing up from the porch, she began to sing along with Marcus, her human voice blending with his ursine tones in a harmony that seemed to bridge the impossible gap between species. The lullaby that had comforted them both as children now became a shared expression of grief and gratitude for the woman who had taught them both how to love. As their voices faded into the evening silence, Marcus did something that surprised everyone present. Instead of retreating to the forest as he had every previous evening, he remained on the porch, his massive body settling into a protective position that made it clear he had no intention of leaving. "He's not saying goodbye," Luna realized, her understanding of Marcus's intentions crystallizing with sudden clarity. "He's saying he's found his family again, and this time he's not going to let anyone take it away." Eleanor looked at the young woman and the massive bear, who had both lost everything and somehow found each other again, and she knew that Martha's greatest wish had finally been fulfilled. Not just reunion, but recognition, the acknowledgement that love, once given freely and completely, never truly dies, but transforms into something even stronger than the bonds of birth. "Martha would be so proud," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion as she watched Luna gently place her hand on Marcus's massive head. Her children finally came home. In the growing darkness of the Yellowstone evening, three unlikely family members sat together on a cabin porch, united by a love that had survived separation, death, and the vast differences between their species, proof that some bonds are too strong for even tragedy to break. The morning light filtering through the cabin windows carried the promise of new beginnings as Luna awakened to find Marcus still maintaining his protective vigil on the porch. 3 weeks had passed since Martha's funeral, and the massive Grizzly had not returned to the wilderness even once, choosing instead to remain close to the only home he had ever truly known. His presence had initially concerned the park authorities, but Agent Clearwater's recommendation for a special research designation had created a legal framework that allowed Marcus to stay while contributing to groundbreaking studies on animal cognition and emotional intelligence. Dr. Blackwood had established a permanent research station at Martha's cabin, with Luna's permission, documenting the unprecedented relationship between human and bear that was challenging everything the scientific community thought they understood about interspecies bonding. The journal entries Martha had left behind provided crucial context for understanding the depth of emotional development that was possible when love replaced fear as the foundation of human-animal interaction. Day 21 of post-trauma observation, Blackwood spoke into his recorder as he watched Luna emerge onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee, setting one down near Marcus before taking her customary seat beside him. Subject continues to display complex emotional responses and adaptive behaviors that suggest grief processing remarkably similar to human mourning patterns. Most significantly, the bear has developed what can only be described as a caretaking relationship with the deceased's adopted daughter, mirroring the protective behaviors he exhibited during the python crisis. Eleanor had become a daily visitor to the cabin, bringing groceries and emotional support while helping Luna navigate the legal complexities of inheriting Martha's property. The community had rallied around the unusual family, with local businesses contributing supplies and tourists making pilgrimages to witness the bear who had become a symbol of love, transcending species barriers. The story had captured international attention, but Luna was careful to control access to Marcus, ensuring that their healing process wasn't disrupted by excessive human intrusion. "I never understood what Martha meant when she used to say that family isn't about blood," Luna said to Eleanor as they sat on the porch, watching Marcus methodically arrange fresh wildflowers by the cabin door. "But watching him honor her memory every single day, seeing how he's trying to take care of me the way she took care of him, I finally get it. Love creates family, and family creates love." The financial pressures that had threatened to force Martha from her home had been resolved through an unexpected source. National Geographic had purchased Luna's python attack footage for a substantial sum, and the resulting documentary had generated enough revenue to pay off the cabin's mortgage and establish a research fund in Martha's memory. More importantly, the publicity had brought attention to the python crisis, leading to enhanced protection measures for Yellowstone's ecosystem. Dr. Richard Stonecrow's trial had concluded the previous week with a conviction on 14 federal charges related to environmental terrorism and endangering public safety. His research facility had been dismantled, and the surviving pythons had been relocated to appropriate captive environments where they could live out their lives without threatening native wildlife. The conspiracy had reached further than anyone initially suspected, involving illegal wildlife trafficking networks that used national parks as testing grounds for biological weapons research. The healing process for both Luna and Marcus had been complicated by their shared trauma, but it had also created a bond that seemed to strengthen daily. Marcus had developed protective behaviors toward Luna that mirrored those he had shown toward Martha, positioning himself between her and potential threats while allowing her the independence to pursue her photography work within the park boundaries. Their daily routines had evolved into a rhythm that felt natural despite its unprecedented nature. Each morning, Marcus would wake Luna with gentle sounds outside her bedroom window, then accompany her on photographic expeditions through territories that were safer because of his presence. Other wildlife seemed to recognize his protective status, with deer and elk showing less fear when Marcus was nearby, as if understanding that the massive bear had appointed himself as a guardian rather than a predator. "He's teaching me things about the park that no human guide ever could," Luna explained to a visiting journalist who was documenting their story for a major wildlife magazine. "Marcus knows every game trail, every water source, every safe passage through terrain that would be dangerous for a human alone. But more than that, he's showing me how to see the forest through eyes that understand it as home rather than just a place to visit." The afternoons were reserved for what had become known as Martha time. Quiet hours when Luna would read aloud from Martha's journals while Marcus listened with the focused attention of someone hearing beloved stories. The entries revealed decades of wildlife observations, veterinary insights, and personal reflections that were providing invaluable data for Dr. Blackwood's research while helping Luna understand the woman who had shaped her early childhood. June 12, 2010. Luna read from a journal entry that had been written 7 years after Marcus's release. "Spotted a large male grizzly near Hayden Valley today who matches Marcus's distinctive markings. He was leading a family of hikers away from a dangerous cliff area, showing them a safer path to their destination. My boy is still taking care of people, still remembering what I taught him about protecting those who can't protect themselves." The evenings brought the most poignant moments, when Marcus would settle beside Martha's favorite rocking chair, while Luna worked on editing her photographs or corresponding with the increasing number of researchers who wanted to study their relationship. The massive bear had learned to recognize the sounds of Luna's different cameras, remaining perfectly still when she was photographing wildlife, but positioning himself protectively when strangers approached the cabin. Agent Clearwater had become an unexpected ally in protecting Marcus's unique status, using her federal authority to establish the cabin area as a restricted research zone that limited public access while allowing legitimate scientific study. Her nephew Tommy had recovered fully from his python attack, and his family had visited the cabin to thank Marcus personally, a moment that reinforced everyone's understanding of the bear's capacity for recognizing and protecting innocent lives. "The hardest part isn't the practical stuff," Luna confided to Eleanor during one of their evening conversations. "It's the fear that I'm not enough to replace what Martha meant to him. She saved his life, raised him, taught him everything that makes him special. I'm just the person who happened to be here when she died." Eleanor's response carried the wisdom of someone who had spent decades studying the complexities of animal behavior and emotional development. "Honey, you're not replacing Martha any more than Marcus is replacing the family you lost as a child. You're creating something new together, built on the foundation of love that she gave you both. That's not replacement, that's growth." The transformation in Marcus's behavior over the past month had been subtle but significant. While he maintained his protective vigilance and daily memorial rituals, he had also begun displaying behaviors that suggested forward-looking adaptation rather than just backward-looking grief. He had started exploring new areas of the park with Luna, showing curiosity about photographic subjects that interested her, and even playing, a behavior rarely observed in adult wild bears. "He's teaching himself to be happy again," Dr. Blackwood observed, watching Marcus gently bat at soap bubbles that Luna had blown from the cabin porch. "The capacity for joy to coexist with grief, for love to create new meaning while honoring old loss, these are psychological concepts we barely understand in humans, yet this bear is demonstrating them with remarkable sophistication." As autumn approached Yellowstone with its promise of changing seasons and new challenges, the unlikely family that had formed around Martha's legacy prepared for whatever the future might bring. Luna had decided to make the cabin her permanent home, using it as a base for wildlife photography that would honor Martha's conservation values while contributing to the growing body of research surrounding Marcus's unique story. The bear, who had once been forced to choose between love and freedom, had found a way to embrace both, creating a new definition of family that transcended every boundary humans had constructed between civilization and wilderness. In doing so, he had proven that some bonds are too strong for even death to break, and that love, once given completely, continues to grow and transform across time, species, and the very nature of what it means to belong to someone who will never let you go. A message for our cherished community. For those of you who understand that the most profound love stories aren't always between people of the same species, Marcus and Luna's journey reminds us that family isn't defined by blood or even biology. It's created by the choice to stay, to protect, and to honor the memory of those who shaped us. Like many of us who have experienced loss in our golden years, Marcus faced the heartbreak of losing his beloved Martha. Yet he found the strength to love again, to create new bonds while treasuring old ones. This story speaks to every grandparent who has welcomed stepchildren, every widow who has found friendship in unexpected places, and every person who believes that love multiplies rather than divides when we open our hearts. In a world that often feels divided, Marcus proves that compassion, loyalty, and the willingness to sacrifice for others creates connections that transcend every barrier we think separates us. What memories of unexpected family bonds or loyal friendships have shaped your own life? Have you ever experienced a connection with an animal that taught you something profound about love and loss? Please share your stories in the comments below. Our community treasures every voice and every experience that reminds us love has no boundaries.